As night swallows the valley, an ice-cold mist rolls out of the trees, shrouding everything in a grey veil and almost seeming to grow thicker with every step you take. As you push onward through the fog, you notice what looks like deep wagon ruts in the mud of the road beneath your feet. Judging by the depth of the ruts and the way the mud has been churned up, it looks like the wagon was in a great hurry. As you continue along the misty road, the forest ahead opens out into a clearing. The road leads all the way to a riverbank at its far edge where you see a bridge and a solid stone building. This must be the inn, but oddly you notice there are no lights illuminating its windows. As you draw close to the tree line, you can make out the shape of a wagon which has veered off the road near the bridge. A human man sits slumped in the mud beside it, a terrified boy of perhaps 12 or 13, standing in front of him holding a rusty short sword and shaking hands, his eyes full of desperation. Several ragged humanoid shapes are lurching toward him through the mist, loosely clutching rusting weapons. "Get back!" he screams. "Get away from my dad! Roll for initiative!" So I hope you'll forgive the theatrics, but that's an example of a way that I like to start combat encounters. I think it's important to tie all of this back to a cogent theme that isn't just about, inflicting my prose on YouTube. If we think about what the point of these videos and the reason why you want to go to all this trouble and implement encounter mechanics and read out pieces of prose like that and sync them up with background music and all the rest of it, is that combat encounters in D&D should feel epic. They should tie into like the idea of the epic scope and all blah, blah, blah that I've said in my 3 pillars videos. One massive way for you to convey this epic feeling to your players and sweep them up in an epic fantasy campaign is that the fights and the combats that they are doing should feel epic. All of these videos about encounter mechanics and, like, to be honest, most of the videos on this channel are going to be driving towards that goal. So it's important that we keep that as our North Star. Pick that idea and everything that we do is going to be reinforcing that. And I'm really happy to see that I'm not the only one that feels this way. Quick shout out to SSRPG for this excellent comment. I really could not have put this better myself, and I couldn't agree more. The more experience I've got as a GM, the more I've come to see encounter design as a pillar of the craft. I think it's natural for GMs to be drawn in with the promise of designing a great world, but the real nuts and bolts work of creating great experiences is designing epic encounters. You can write an amazing villain, but if fighting her isn't cool, the players won't remember. As I've improved my encounter design, I've noticed my players start to care more about everything else. Yeah. 10 out of 10, epic comment. So if you have like a preamble like that, it sets everything up, you get some atmosphere going, you get the blood pumping a little bit and people are all excited to roll initiative versus like, you come to the river and there are some skeletons threatening a young boy, roll for initiative. You have to sell it, right? Just embrace the cheese. But this is a mechanics video, not a fluff video. This video is about a very simple technique, something that you can use and that ties into the idea of waves from the previous video. It's just simply to outnumber the PCs. Make sure the PCs are underdogs, that they are outnumbered by the enemy, preferably overwhelmingly, although this is much easier to do in 4E D&D than it is in other editions. But a couple of these tricks will still totally work fine in 5th. In fact, I'm about to show you one in this video. As humans, we love an underdog. Seeing someone who's outnumbered or overwhelmed triumph against the odds does something for us. I think it's deeply wired into our subconscious, probably because if you think about it, we're not like the biggest, strongest animals. So seeing the little guy win kind of makes us feel okay about a place in the world and feels like maybe we're not going to get eaten alive. Maybe it's something around that. Ties into survival instincts. I don't know. It just feels really good. And if you look at it in movies and film, this trope is everywhere. You had about 1 million action movies where the hero would face up against a seemingly impossible adversary and get the absolute tar beaten out of them until they dig deep and they find the motivation, the will to triumph, and then the tables turn and the underdog turns around and ends up winning in the end. This formula's been done 1 million times. What you want to do is that when the PCs load into the combat encounter, when they see the initial field, the first feeling that they should get is like, oh my God, this is impossible. If they look at the field and initially it seems like there's way too many enemies, they can't possibly cope with all of this, chances are you're going to have a dramatic, interesting encounter, which people will remember and will convey the epic tone of your campaign through to your players in a very visceral and holistic way that's not just fluff disconnected from mechanics. The mechanics support this too. So let's look at an example of how to do that and then, tweak it so the PCs aren't actually in as much danger as it seems initially. This is the encounter that I read the narration out for at the start. PCs are over here. They start over on this side. Over here is the NPCs. Jared, who is wounded, he's been thrown off the wagon. He's lying in the mud, and his little boy, his son Dren, who is faced with this enormous crowd of undead who have chased him through the woods, him and his father, and now they're bearing down on them. And Jared, the father, starts the encounter unconscious and rolling death saves, right? So this is immediately huge ticking clock. The first thing to say about this is that the objective is extremely obvious, and therefore it's satisfying because the PCs know what they have to do just by looking at it. It might be hard to do what they have to do. That's the idea. But the mechanic is discoverable. The goal is discoverable, right? Like, it's obvious. It is not obfuscated. So that's the first thing. If you're going to have, I would say as a general rule for combat encounters, if you're not just fighting stuff, if you're going to put mechanics in, they need to be discoverable and obvious. And the second thing to notice here is that the bulk of the enemies aren't actually concerned with the PCs at all. So although immediately when you load in, the impression is overwhelming odds, you're like, oh my God, there's so many enemies. Most of the enemies are bearing down on the two NPCs. It's a fairly simple setup, but it has quite a lot of emergent paths that the PCs can choose to solve this encounter. They could choose to obliterate all of the undead if they're very powerful. They have a lot of like bursts and blasts, maybe like a wizard and invoker. Then they could probably destroy, the hungering corpses before they get to Dren and Jared. If there's a PC that has optimized movement speed, then maybe they can get over to the other side of the thing and save the day and defend the two of them while the other PCs kind of make their way through this wave of enemies. If a PC can teleport, that would be really cool, right? Maybe a PC can stealth through the trees to the other side. There's like a bunch of different ways that they could get over to help, but we need to make it not very easy to do that. So to get in the PC's way, they have this Deathless Guardian, a couple of Crypt Horrors, and some Skeletal Archers who are going to engage them at range, just to keep things spicy. Otherwise, it would just be a bunch of zombies, and the encounter would be very simple. If you have inexperienced players, then maybe dial back the extra enemies and the mechanics. I think, for example, the Deathless Guardian's aura, that black box, I think it slows when you move through it. So that makes it complicated because you can't just move through. He will slow you and hinder you. The Hungering Corpses also have an MBA which grabs, which is particularly mean because if you try to like tough through the crowd to get to the NPCs, you might get grabbed by a bunch of zombies and then you can't move, right? And you've got to deal with them. That's the other thing. The Hungering Corpses can only move 4 squares. So the distance that they start from Dren and Jared is very deliberate. None of them can get to them on the first turn. When I ran this encounter, actually, Dren has a sword and he has an ability to make an MBA, and the Hungering Corpses are minions. One of them got close enough to threaten his dad, and he took a swing at it and he killed the Hungering Corpse. And this endeared him to the party. They adopted him. One of them was teaching him how to fight. When they camped that night, they were like showing him sword techniques and stuff. A lot of cool things can happen out of a reasonably simple setup. But yeah, this is a pretty workable example of how you can actually make an encounter feel bigger and a threat feel bigger than it actually is to the PCs. I love having huge amounts of enemies on the board because it makes the fight feel very big and very cool. And then when the PCs triumph, when all of those enemies are vanquished, that's cool. That's like the 300, that's badass. It's a concept that you'll see again and again and again through all the other encounters that I'm going to go over and all the other encounter mechanics that I'm going to discuss. Being outnumbered is kind of like a basic condition that I use. Here is another example of a way that you can make the PCs feel outnumbered, but also not expose them to actually all that much danger. I'm not sure why the chunk of my map's missing. I have to fix that. But yeah, this is a siege. The PCs have awoken an undead army from a crypt in the mountains, and the PCs have to hold that army off until the civilians can be evacuated. Obviously, like, pretty huge feeling. And as the PCs, again, when you load in this map and you see an entire freaking army arrayed against you and you're just a bunch of people holding the gate, you get some militia NPCs to help you. So it's not just the party, which felt a little bit unrealistic to kind of go like, you 6 people hold that gate. No. So there's a militia, there's like a trebuchet down here just to make it feel a little bit more like a bigger scale combat encounter, like a war. But yes, make no mistake, you are fighting an army, and these are kind of platoons that move forward and like they have a certain chance to get over the ditch and then they have a certain chance to breach over the wall. So actually, not all of this stuff is going to be brought to bear at once. That would be too much, right? Like you can't possibly have all of this stuff come over the wall at the same time and expect the PCs to cope. You know, I kind of left it a little bit to random chance because I liked things to be unpredictable. I don't want to be saying like, I definitely know that only that one is going over the wall. I guess you could run the encounter that way. I feel like it's less fun, right? Like the part of the point of D&D is trusting the dice. So set your percentages where you think they should be, set your chances where you think they should be, and then just kind of let the dice fall where they may and let the PCs, you know, improvise based on what happens. But just to make things spicy, while these armies are besieging the wall, the Shadow Magus teleports, you know, Witchbound Vanguard back behind the wall to attack the trebuchet, right? So you've got multiple different objectives. Some people have to hold the walls, some people have to protect the trebuchet crew. There's quite a lot of pressure that gets applied immediately, and this feeling of like the armies are advancing on the wall, and that's bad enough. And then you raise the stakes by teleporting enemies in behind, and then you have this gigantic revenant colossus here in the center of the battlefield that's slowly stomping its way towards the gate, and is intended basically as a living battering ram. But then you have to choose, like, does the trebuchet shoot the colossus, or does the trebuchet shoot at the armies that are coming over the wall, or does it try to take out one of the shadow magi who are, so they can't teleport stuff in anymore? I think I set it so that when the Vanguard teleport in, the portal stays for a round. So technically, like the PC, if they were feeling really gutsy, they could jump into that portal and be teleported next to the Shadow Magus, but then how on earth do you get back? I don't know. The PCs will come up with some shenanigans. There's something. There's always something that you don't think of. But, you know, the thing is that as the DM, you just give them the possibility, right? Like you just set that there and kind of go, hey, here's the thing you can use. What do you want to do with it? And then you see, inevitably, they come up with some crazy thing, some crazy plan, and you're like, yeah, that's awesome. Just go and do that, right? It's not about trying to decide the way that the PCs will solve the problem. It's about creating a problem that can have multiple solutions. Ultimately, the Legion is just going to keep coming, but you can hold out until all the civilians are safe, which feels very heroic. Whenever you get one of these infinite spawns of enemies that just keep coming, then it feels like a last stand, and it feels like you have a license to unload every single ounce of power that your PC has access to. And that feels good, right? Like it's like the big green flag from the DM to kind of go, there will be no combat encounters after this. You don't need to save anything for later in the day. Just let rip. Go for it. And that feels really cool. It's very kind of freeing when you don't have to worry about your resources all so much. If I remember rightly, the PCs get a night to sleep before this so they can long rest, or I think an NPC actually gives them like a magical restoration, which restores all of their hit points and their daily powers and all the rest of it. So they are at the fullest possible strength when this situation happens, and that feels fun, right? Like to me. So this is a very epic feeling, very big encounter, quite entertaining. I think it was certainly fun to run, and it was fun to watch the PCs engage with it. So yeah, to sum up, which one of these looks more exciting to you as a PC from the player character's point of view? This or this? The first one, I don't know, even numbers, it looks like a standard combat encounter, a run-of-the-mill thing. You're just going to like blast through these undead and keep exploring the crypt. It looks like more of a nuisance to me than anything else. I'm not excited by it. The second one, I feel incredibly intimidated. I feel scared. I'm looking at it going like, I don't think we can do this. That's the kind of feeling where when you win, despite having that feeling at the start, it feels amazing. And this is the kind of feeling that we want to evoke by using this outnumbered mechanic. You might be looking at this and going like, the last couple of fights, they were different because the first one, most of the monsters weren't interested in the PCs as their primary concern. And the second one, you had all these mechanics in place to protect the PCs from the weight of numbers of the enemy. But this one's just a flat out fight. So surely the PCs are going to get overwhelmed here. Well, I think not necessarily, because you have two waves of monsters here. The monsters on the right-hand side of the board are the only ones that can get into melee. They can start inflicting damage. They can be effective right at the start of the fight. The monsters on the left-hand side of the board over here, they can't get over there and actually start doing anything until maybe like 1 or 2 rounds have passed. What'll happen is the combat starts, a bunch of those minions will probably go down, the ogre at the front will take a bunch of damage, maybe they'll take out one of the archers. So that first wave of monsters is going to be looking in pretty bad shape by the time the second one gets over there. And actually, I think that the PCs are going to be fine in this instance. And if you're worried about it, you can always introduce extra mechanics like I did with the siege. You could make that glowing circle on the ground like a circle of protection. You could give the healing boost or damage boost or both to the PCs if you're worried about the balance of the encounter. But yeah, I think that, they'll be fine. I certainly know, like as a player character, looking at this or looking at this, which one of these two encounters feels more exciting and which one of these two encounters feels like more of a challenge and something that I want to actually play through. So yeah, that's just a couple of thoughts on making combat encounters feel epic by outnumbering the PCs, by deliberately making them underdogs, and by really like playing into that to a ridiculous degree. As always, lack of restraint is your best friend. Feel free to, ditch any ideas that may make you hold back in the name of realism or whatever. Of course, a ragtag bunch of people couldn't hold a gate against an army, right? It would not be possible. But in myths and legends and the realm of fantasy that we deal with, that is the kind of thing that those heroes do. And that's what the PCs should do. Anyway, I have to go and see what is wrong with my cat. So until next time, I'll catch you later. Thanks for watching. Bye. Or does the trebuchet shoot at the...